Begin by kind of pointing out, situating that you and I, we are not born in Eden, okay? We enter a world that's already, shall I say, curved in on itself in certain ways. And those of you who've been with us on this so far, you'll know what I'm referring to. This is kind of Genesis 1 and 2, and 3. But our agency, our dominion, which is how humans are created in Genesis 1, it's developed not only by differentiating, as it does in Genesis 2, into production and protection and communication, but we've also had this other thing happen that you see in Genesis 3. We already experience a need to manage our appearance and kind of present ourselves in one way or another with others. We already experience this kind of impulse to withdraw sometimes, to find even the relations that at some level we crave with other people sometimes, to find those as threatening and something we want to pull away from. And we already have within us this kind of impulse to play loose with personal responsibility, right? And so we don't just have Genesis 1 and 2 in us. We already have Genesis 3. And that's also true of Cain and Abel when we move into this fourth chapter. And so in some ways, Cain and Abel tell our story more closely than Adam and Eve do. Okay? Now, let me say one more thing about how I'm reading this. So I said that we have here these stories of origin, stories of beginnings that are kind of cast to kind of draw pictures of things that we all have in common as human beings. And part of how I take this, and so this is just an assumption I'm working with, and with all this stuff, could be wrong about a lot of it, but I'm working on it. We can kind of play with this, right? So I take it that if you have a series of stories about origins that are supposed to show human nature or something, about what human beings are like, that narrative order, in other words, what comes after in the order, corresponds in some way to kind of the depth of the issues being dealt with. Okay? So, in other words, that what you see in Genesis 1 is to some degree the deepest thing that differentiates in Genesis 2, and then it's kind of overlaid with the things that are happening in Genesis 3 and Genesis 4. So it corresponds to relatively deeper, more kind of necessary, fixed elements of our makeup, and relatively more surface or kind of circumstantial, contingent elements, right? So I'm assuming that before and after in this kind of refers in some way to deeper or more surface elements, okay? Now, and with that, what I want to say is what we see all the way through Genesis 11, all of this is referring to things that are in all of us, but different layers, as it were, okay? Okay. The next thing I want to do as we kind of move into to looking at the text itself is just to point out that we've been working with symbolic names already, but I haven't actually spent time mentioning them, okay? But we need to do it now, okay, in order to work well with what we have in front of us. So in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, we're reading about, I'll just make the names what they are in more English, something like dusty and vivacious would probably be a good way to get this, right? So Adam comes from Adamah, comes from soil, And so the name for human being, it's kind of rooted, it comes out of this sense of the ground from which he's created. And then this woman, he gives the name of Eve to, and Eva is because it's associated. It comes from the word for life, or chaya, right? And so vivacious kind of has that sort of sense in English. When we move to chapter 4, we move from the first couple. They're still there on the first line here, but the first couple, so the primordial relation of a husband and wife, to now sibling relations. And here we have, again, symbolic names. There's Cain, or control, and Abel, Hevel, vapor. Okay, and the brothers are going to kind of live into their names in important ways. So we'll have to pay attention to that. But first, I want us to focus on Eve, who's the one who first comes kind of to our attention here. Before we move to Cain and Abel, Eve has kind of the primary focus. So chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, first half of 2. So the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain. And then she kind of has this exultant declaration, I've acquired a man. And then you just get the Lord. Okay? It often gets translated with the help of the Lord, which it could have been, but it's more ambiguous than that. And maybe even it's like I've acquired a man or made a man like the Lord. Okay, in the same way the Lord created, something like that, right? There's this kind of exaltation in what she says. And then it says, and again, she gave birth to his brother, Abel, vapor, steam, breath, like fleeting breath. And we just stop there for the moment. So the first thing to notice is that when it says that the man knew his wife, so it's perfect aspect, which may mean that this actually the conception was in Eden, as it were, right? And now they've been expelled, and she's giving birth, right? And not necessarily, that's not necessary, but it's possible, and it would kind of work if part of what's being communicated here is that the issue is not, because this is, as it were, an ill-fated couple brothers, right? Things do not go well. And maybe the point is to say it's not the wrong place of conception. The wrong isn't about the place, it's the people, okay? There's something much more personal going on here. But she has this kind of intense cry, I've possessed a man, I've inquired a man, just like the Lord. And that kind of possessiveness that's in her, the way that she describes this, I think is worth just kind of reflecting on a little bit. Okay? There's often a shockingly intense kind of attachment with the firstborn, right? That can be kind of surprising to the mother as well, right? And it may be something like this that's going on, but kind of what you get depicted in this is super terse, but is that all the focus is on this firstborn. All the focus is on Cain, right? And the name Cain, it's related to that word I acquired, okay, or I took possession, or I controlled, right? And so his name has this sense of control, acquisition. But then the brother, and it's interesting, you have, and then again she gave birth to his brother Abel. Now, as you go through this, Abel is always just Cain's brother. Like Cain has his own kind of thing going on, and he's going to live into his name. He's focused on being in control of things. But Abel, he's always just the brother of Cain, right? And what you never get, and actually it's going to be a kind of a main theme in this, is you never get Cain actually being a brother to Abel, right? There's kind of a despising. And so one of the key themes at this kind of level would be something like this, like as we move from the primordial couple of husband and wife to this next kind of primordial relation, which is that of siblings, right? How do you know if you're being a brother or not, right? And at some level, there's something like this: a brother. If you're a brother, you don't ask what a brother's good for. Okay? If you're wondering what the brother's good for, you're not being a brother. Okay? That comes out of viewing this other person, your brother, in a way that's inappropriate, right? Kind of looking at him as just some kind of a resource, right? That needs to be used in some way. And so when Abel appears, his name there, Hevel, Hevel means vapor, fleeting breath, but it also has this other kind of meaning, worthless. Okay, like, right? Which, I mean, you kind of like, who calls their kid that, right? I mean, that's one thing, but it kind of, it depicts kind of his place in this whole set of relations, right? That the focus is always on Cain. Cain's own focus is always on Cain, right? But also it seems like the others around are used to Cain being the focus, and it's as if Abel just kind of floats around the edges. Okay? Now, given that these are symbolic names and kind of symbolic things happening that have to do with kind of core issues of human life and how we relate in the most primary ways, it's worth kind of thinking about what is the primary, what's the first, the kind of the default way of one brother relating to another, especially if it's kind of to, a firstborn to a secondborn. And I'll just say there's a certain tradition that goes back some way, that because you don't get a second and Adam knew his wife, that Cain and Abel are twins. And that's possible, but I don't think it's necessary. And I'm going to just kind of work with this as if they're not twins, okay? Just for this reason. I want to think about the dynamic of a brother who has a younger sibling kind of come on the scene. Okay? Because that's how it is with most of us, not all, but there's twins. And so anyhow, there's something that goes on within family dynamics, right? Where, first of all, there's this kind of intense attachment to the first one. And within that, there's a kind of relation where that one's used to kind of having all of the attention. That's normal. And so there's something when the next one comes that feels like he's being dispossessed. Right? He's losing some of the attention. And so it's really kind of normal at some level to find some kind of animosity there. Right? Now, part of the point of this story is, all of these, they kind of depict human life, and it casts a light on some of the darker elements of us, right? And part of what it's pressing us to at least ask the question is the default relation between two brothers not exactly that of great harmony and, and love? Is it more like rivalry, right? A rivalry that can even kind of heat up into wanting to hurt or kill, okay? And it turns out that, that's a theme that runs all the way through Scripture. By the way, we only have one account as far as I'm aware. I may need to run through the Rolodex, but as far as I can remember, there's only one account of kind of dealing with the sister relations, but it happens in the setting of being married to one guy, right? So you have Rachel and Leah, and again, it's a rivalry. Okay, so it's not just the guys, there may be there's something in these kind of sibling relations that at least have a kind of a possibility of turning into a competitive relation. Okay, both of them are, so we have their names and they kind of live into these names, and we're given then their occupations here, right? So in verse 2, Abel is a keeper of flocks, of small cattle, and Cain is a servant of the earth, of the ground. He farms, okay? Now, as we move into 3 to 5 here, I want to point out kind of a big theme that comes out within this context of how will brothers relate. And it's this. So you have this kind of instrumentalizing relationship, using one relation to get something else, okay? Both with regard to the brother and with regard to the Lord, okay? And you also have the question or kind of the theme of faces, okay? Do you look up? Do you look, who do you look into the face of? Why do you look into the face of or refuse to? And this again, it's in relation to the Lord and in relation to the brother, okay? So let's read the passage. Chapter 4, verses 3 through 5. So it came about in the course of time, after some days, right, that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. And Abel, on his part, he also brought from the firstlings of his flock and their fat portions. And the Lord looked at Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering, he didn't look at it. Okay? The Lord didn't look at it. And so Cain became very angry, and his face fell. He refused to look up. Okay? He refused to look up. So let's start by kind of thinking about this character whose name is Control. Okay? He has this occupation of farming. He tills the ground and gets food out of it. And in the course of time, he brings some of that produce to the Lord. And it's worth kind of pointing out here, because I think we're used to thinking of offerings and sacrifice and all of that as something that kind of God asked for, but there's no request for it here. It's like purely a human kind of initiative idea, okay? All of the first sacrifices are of that sort, okay? It's just, there's something in human beings that we think this up, and it's like, hey, let's try this. And part of what we're gonna have to ask is like, what are we trying when we do that, okay? Vapor, Abel, this one that's just kind of here and gone, that is kind of considered worthless. Well, he does the same sort of thing, maybe a little bit differently, a little bit better. He brings from what he has, so it's not not vegetation, it's animal that he offers. But it says that he brings from the first and he gives the fat portions. Okay? When you give from the first of what you have, there's a certain element of trust in that, right? Because it's different if you take, what you're living off of, and the first that comes in, you take some of that and give it. That implies a kind of a trust, or at least an acceptance of not being in control of what happens next. That's different from if I get it all in and then I take a part and give it, right? There's something different in that, okay? And maybe this kind of indicates that Abel, Hevel, he's kind of living out his name as well. He has this sense that his life is a vapor, it's a gift, it's not something that can be controlled or held on to. So when you take this name that means steam or vapor, have you ever tried grabbing steam? Right? You can't control it, right? And maybe what's implied here is there's a kind of understanding on his part that his life isn't in his own grasp, okay? And maybe there's a degree of trust that comes from, realizing that, letting go of it. But whatever the case, whether or not there's a certain kind of, moral, spiritual, elevation in how he brings his sacrifice, that can certainly be debated. But what's clear is that the Lord, he looks at his offering, at his offering, but he doesn't look at Cain and his offering. So you get this, the face, right? Looking at the face. Now, at this point, we're told that Cain gets very, very angry. His face falls. He won't look up. He won't look anyone in the face. Okay? Won't look anyone in the face. So what's going on with this? That's the first kind of question we want to ask. What's going on in this? And just kind of point out in terms of what's depicted here in these characters. So Cain's used to attention. He's used to being in control. And if you have in mind what's happened in chapter 2 and 3 of Genesis, just kind of reading this in a kind of naive way like that, he's doing everything right. Cain is doing everything right. That's, when you go back to chapter 2, verse 5, we notice that in this second creation account, you start with an earth in which there's kind of something intrinsic in the soil that can pop up under the circumstance of God doing something and humans doing something. So there's something like this three-way interaction between God and human labor and the earth that brings out life that you can eat, right? Vegetation, right? And so, and then, after they take the fruit of ambiguous understandings, again, if you weren't here, sorry, we can talk it. We can come back to it, or I can give you a link to the talks for the last few weeks. But after that, Adam is told that the ground is cursed, so that it's going to take, as it were, extra work to eat from it. But he's told that's how he's going to eat. So in a sense, Cain he's following the instructions. Okay? And so then as he does this, it kind of occurs to him that maybe I'll give some of this back to God, who's one of the key elements in this. And I think this is a little uncharitable reading, but it's coming off of this name meaning control, right? Let me suggest that what he's doing here is he's trying to leverage God in some way. He's trying to leverage in some way. There's a kind of instrumentalization of that relationship. He wants God's attention. He wants God to look at him because, or for the sake, not for the sake of interacting with God, but for the sake of the crop keeping, in order, coming back again and again. Okay? And let me just kind of point out here, if you look at the front end of this chapter, you get the birth of Cain and Abel, and now this whole story that's following, which is about, among other things, the beginning of offering, of sacrifice. But at the very end of the chapter, you get, spoiler alert, you all know that Abel gets killed, right? But after that, you get this genealogy of Cain, and in verse 25 and following, 25 and 26, you get this second genealogy started in which there's this kind of new one appointed in place of Abel. His name's Seth. And Seth has a son. His name's Enosh. And the chapter ends with, at that time, they began to call upon the name of the Lord. So part of what's happening here is you have this kind of split and you have two different genealogies coming down. And what happens is in one, the one flowing from Cain, you have the origin of sacrifice, but it's a sacrifice without prayer. Okay? It's just, I'm going to try to give and see if I can get something back, right? It's trying to, there's seems to be like a sense of bartering with God that's there somewhere in human makeup, right? And then separately, you have the beginnings of prayer. Okay? And that's interesting because later when it comes in and it's kind of, and you have life in, a tabernacle and then temple and all of that, the point is to bring sacrifice and prayer together, right? But it's like, it's depicted here as they show up separately, okay? So there's something going on here with the one whose name is control being the first to think of it and do it, okay? Now, the problem with electronic devices is they do what they're supposed to when you touch them, even if you don't want them to. So, okay. So Cain, he's doing what one might expect from like Genesis 2 and 3 to be all the right stuff. But he's kind of instrumentalizing every relationship, the relationship with God. And then there's this second relationship that he's not paying any attention to. And that is really the focus then when kind of God comes into the story over and over. It's what he's focusing on is this. And that is that there's someone that nobody ever looks at. And so Cain never looks at him. Cain never names him, right? He never uses his name. And that's Abel, right? The one who's, vapor, here and gone, worthless. So part of how I see this is that Cain is being depicted. So we already kind of laid out, we have this impulse to make something happen, right? That's dominion, Genesis 1. Genesis 2, it gets differentiated into production, protection, communication. Those get tangled up in different ways in chapter 3. But what's happening with Cain is he's kind of obsessed on producing, right? On producing. And he's going to make everything else everything is either useful or useless when all you're focused on is what you can produce, right? And so he's turning persons, both God and his brother, but most importantly his brother here, he's turning them into something to be used or discarded. Now, that's what Cain is doing, but then we're told what God does with this this offering that comes from Abel, from vapor, right? And we're told that God looks at him, okay? He looks at him and he looks at his offering. So there's something, just think about this as like, what is the appropriate kind of primordial relation to another person? Let me suggest that the thing that's needed most before anything else gets added on is that you look at him, that you look at her, okay? That you look into the face, because that's acknowledging the person as a person in a very important way, right? When there's a refusal to even look at a person, like to look in their face, right? That is a denial of the distinctive value that a person is, right? It's a refusal to have the kind of connection, the acknowledgement of one person to another, okay? And so in many ways, the rest of ethical relations kind of grow out of a willingness to look at another, to kind of see in that person's face something that calls for a response, and something that I should attend to, I should listen to. When I look at somebody in the face, I see something about what's going on, right? You can see if there's hurt. You can see if there's hope. There's all sorts of things that just kind of shine through if you bother to look at somebody in the face, okay? And so, and that's kind of a theme going all the way through this chapter. Now, it's also a theme that runs throughout Scripture, that God looks on things that other people don't, and He takes account for, He looks at and cares for people that other people think are worthless, okay? And so this is very much in keeping with what we see of the Lord here, that continues to be the case. So mom doesn't look at Abel, Cain doesn't look at him, Cain doesn't name him, but God does. God does. And so, and perhaps, as one who knows that his life is a gift and all of that, maybe Abel's gift doesn't have this same kind of sense of leverage in it. I don't know, but the focus here is on Cain and his sense of using things to control. And one of the things that he focuses on here is that when the brother that he doesn't pay attention to, he doesn't really kind of acknowledge him. But when the Lord looks at that brother, now Cain has his attention, right? But not in the sense of like he's just upset at it. He's upset that the Lord would pay attention to that guy, right? Now, in verses 6 and 7, then, the Lord comes and speaks to Cain. And this is what he says. He says, why are you angry and refusing to look up? Right? Why are you refusing to look at anyone? Do good and you'll be able to look people in the face, right? If you don't do good, sin's lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you can master it. Right? You kind of give this little pep talk, but it focuses on this kind of refusal to look in the face. Okay. Now, a couple things here. I mean, there's that focus on the face because that's how you recognize a person. But there's also this sense of how error can progress by stages until it kind of takes over a life, right? And so it starts by lurking outside the door. And if you don't attend to it and fix it, then by the time it comes in, what comes in as a guest ends up staying as the master, right? It takes over. And so, so the Lord speaks to Cain, and kind of this little pep talk, but it's a pep talk focused on, attending to persons, looking, lift up your face, do what's right, and you can lift up your face. The response, verse 8, is it's the murder, okay? And it's really interesting how this is. So it says, Cain spoke to Abel, his brother, and you're told nothing of what he says. Now, you have in a number of ancient versions, including the Septuagint, let's go into the field. It kind of fills in the gap because there's like nothing there. There's nothing there. It's like ... right? And it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel, his brother, killed him. Now, let me suggest that that kind of ellipsis, that lack of any content to what's said, is on purpose, and it's actually the point. It's actually the point. When we're kind of instrumentalizing a relationship, in other words, using a person rather than relating to that person, our speech then, it starts to lack any real content, right? I'm just saying something to get you somewhere. It's like, I'm not really talking to you. I'm not really sharing anything. I'm not really engaging in that way. And so you end up with speech it's devoid of any content. And so it's left out. It's like Cain spoke to his brother Abel, blah, 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 right? And now they're in the field, and notice he doesn't lift his face up at his brother. He rises up against his brother. It's like an animal, think of a bear coming up on the hind legs to attack, right? So he brings up his body to strike his brother and kill him, okay? So that's it. He kills him. Nothing told about the struggle or anything like that. It's premeditated. He kills him. Verse 9 through 12, the Lord comes back and speaks to Cain again. And like in Genesis 3, it starts with a question, right? Where's your brother, right? Where's your brother? Here, I'll read the whole thing. The Lord said to Cain, where is Abel, your brother? And Cain's response is, well, I do not know. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And the Lord said, what have you done? The voice of your brother's blood, it's literally bloods, it's plural, we'll talk about that in a second, is crying out to me from the ground. And now you're cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it'll no longer yield its strength to you. You'll be a vagrant, a wanderer on the earth. Cain said to the Lord, the punishment is too great to bear. Behold, you've driven me this day from the face of the ground. So there's another face here, right? And from your face, I'll be hidden. And I'll be a vagrant and wanderer on earth, and it'll come about whoever finds me will kill me. Okay. And so the Lord said to him, therefore, whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, lest anyone finding him should slay him. Okay. So where's your brother is what the Lord asks. And Cain's response shows that he's completely unchanged. Right? First he lies, and then he kind of mocks the idea of a brother that he needs to take care of. Okay? It's interesting. The only time he actually acknowledges having a brother, mentions his brother, it's to mock the idea that it should mean anything to him. Right? So notice that both of these, the lying itself is a way of instrumentalizing speech instead of relating through it, right? And in his kind of disregard of his brother, kind of mocking the idea that he should have some special care for it, he shows that he thinks of instead of thinking of this as a person with kind of sanctity and value, he has only thought of him in terms of, what's he good for? What's he good for? Okay. Now, at this point then, when he's told that he's going to be cursed from the ground, which, by the way, this is new. Adam is told that the soil will be cursed because of what he's done. But Adam and Eve they're not cursed. They're not cursed. The soil is cursed, the snake is cursed. But Adam and Eve, the man and the woman, they're not cursed, going back to Genesis 3. So this is new, and it's a deeper, an intense, more intense sort of thing here. And what we find here is now that this kind of, earth, God, human worker relation, it's ruptured. It's lost because of the brother that was killed. Now, I said that in the Lord's words here, he says, your brother's blood, or bloods literally, cry out to me from the ground. Whenever violent bloodshed is named, is described in the Hebrew Bible, this word blood, dam, it's in the plural. It's bloods. Okay, and this is something that was noticed already in kind of late Second Temple, early post Second Temple era, and there's a reflection on it in the Mishnah that I think is worthwhile. It's significant here. It's in the context of regulations for trial for a capital crime, something that somebody could be killed as executed because of, and so something like this, murder, and it asks the questions why is it plural? Why is it bloods that cry out from the ground? And you get a number of different responses, and kind of at the core of them is something like this. There's two things. One is that when you kill a person, you don't just snuff out that life, but all the different lives that would come from that, right? And part of what you have to think about, what's being kind of gestured at here, is that it's there's this kind of whole line of life that's being extinguished, that's being nullified, but there's also this sense in which the person that's being lost is, as it were, a whole world in some way. So the line, if you guys have watched Schindler's List, you kind of know this line that comes from the Mishnah. It ends up on the inside on this ring they give them at the end. But the one who takes a life extinguishes an entire world, and the one who saves a life saves a world entire, right? And what's behind it is something like this. It's a reflection on the value and kind of the depth of importance of every person. Okay, that kind of what's lost when a person is removed from the world is not just like this individual in some sense, but that person, to be a person, to one with a face that looks out, right, is to be a whole. It's like a whole way of viewing the world, right? Think about it this way. When you think about somebody that you've lost, that you mourn, okay, in a very real sense, what you're missing isn't just their body around. What you're missing is that this person had a way of seeing the world that nobody sees that way, right? If you don't get, you don't get persons, if you don't get that everybody sees the world in a way that's unrepeatable, right? And there's things in this world that'll never be noticed and seen if that person isn't there, right? And so this is this is kind of at the heart of what's being nullified when one says, I'm just here to get as much out of this as I can, and I'll use people, I'll find them useful or useless, rather than of intrinsic value, something like that. Now, because of this, because Cain is now, he has this kind of ruptured relation with God, with the earth, he suddenly feels disposable himself. He realizes he's killable. He says, somebody could find me and kill me. And it's interesting because now the Lord comes to his aid. Okay? After he's done this unspeakable thing, the Lord immediately comes to his aid and he says, I'll put a sign. What it is, who knows, right? But I will do something to prevent you from being killed as you go. And then you get this really kind of paradoxical thing. It says he goes out from the presence of the Lord and settles in the land of Nod, which means wandering. So he settles in wandering, okay, east of Eden. And then has relations, and they have a son, Enoch, and he builds a city, okay? So you get this kind of series of firsts that comes, and out of this line. Let me see where we're at here. Okay, about time to wrap, and then we can talk. Just point out the firsts. You've got 7 generations in this genealogy. Probably having something to do with, where he's told that if anybody kills Cain, there will be sevenfold vengeance, right? There's something going on with 7. So you then get in this genealogy kind of 7 generations after him that come out. And in it, you get the beginnings of, first of all, the city. One way you could think about this is kind of the one whose name is Control. He's the first to kind of found a city. Where all the other people come from, we're not told, right? You just kind of have to go with it in the story, right? But one way to think about this is that cities are the place where you go to live off of the sweat of somebody else's brow, right? So the one that was working off the soil, that was, having to bring, out of this cursed soil, and now he's cursed from it. The city is the place where you can live off of other people's labor. Okay. And then as you go down, you get to this kind of last generation, and you get the one Lamech who takes 2 wives. Ada and Zillah, and so then there's kind of 3 line, like 2 male and 1 male and female line coming out from that, right? But that have the first of kind of of more advanced civilization, right? So in verse 20. Ada gave birth to Jabal, right? He's the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. So you get kind of nomadic husbandry. And then his brother's name was Jubal, and he's the father of all those who play the lyre and pipe. So music and kind of stringed and wind instrument and nomadic husbandry. And then on the other line from this other wife Zillah, she gave birth to Tubal-Cain, forger of all the implements of bronze and iron. So these are the instruments of war, right? And then he has a sister, Naamah. And with this, then you get a boast from Lamech that. So he's the end of this kind of 7-fold genealogy, and then his boast is that he's killed somebody, and now if it was for Cain a 7-fold vengeance, for him it'll be 70 times 7. So you get, with the origins of husbandry, music, and war, you get something like the boasting taunt, right? For one way to read this is that he's already killed this person and he's claiming immunity. The other way is to take this as a taunt. In the ancient Near East, fights always start with taunts, right? You see this in, kind of the Goliath scene, right? They'd come out day after day, and the Philistines would taunt the Israelites, right? And it's like you have to work yourself up to it before there's a battle. One way of reading this is that Lamech, this is the beginning of kind of the taunt in order to work up to battle. So here's a series of firsts, all right? But kind of at the heart of them is this kind of distinction. 2 ways of receiving life. One as something to control and manipulate. Another as a gift I can't hold, right? And what's lost if I decide to control is the person, okay? The face of another. And it turns out that if I refuse to kind of see and receive the other human being, my brother, I lose the face of God and I lose the face of the earth. It kind of breaks apart those fundamental relations out of which we live. That's the picture that's given here, okay? Let me stop there and we can kind of switch to some kind of dialogue, Q&A on this. There's a lot more, but we can kind of play it out together. Any questions, comments?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, Moses' law isn't a thing yet, right?
Say that.
Moses' law isn't a thing yet.
Yes, yeah, this is before law. Yeah.
So, my question, it's a little technical, but there's no clear instruction on what a sacrifice should or shouldn't be, correct?
Mm-hmm. Right. Or even if there should be at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they decide as like humans, not requested by God necessarily, to go ahead and offer something. So the question is, since we understand that they both offered something that was important to them, admittedly one of them offered something probably more important than the other, but could we argue that Cain wasn't mad because God didn't look at his sacrifice, more so that he was mad because Abel's sacrifice was better? So kind of more jealous of Abel for providing a more worthy, if you will, sacrifice?
Yeah, I think what you see here, I didn't use the word, but I should, let's use it now, is the word envy, right? That what happens here is he is upset that this guy who, he's never been the focus of attention. He's always been the one around the edges, all of that. But he got it right, or at least he got favor, right? He's the one that God looked at. And so, yeah, that's the primary thing. It's like, why him, not me, right? Why him, not me? Which seems to be, it's like a really basic question, isn't it? Between brothers. Like, I mean, I think most of us have had some sort of relation where a sibling, something nice happens, and there's this part like, yeah, but why them, not me, right? And so there's something fairly deep-rooted in that this is depicting, I think. I don't know if that answered your question sufficiently, but
I think it did.
Okay. But yeah, this being before any kind of law or instruction is really important, and we'll say more about that probably maybe next time when we get to the generation of the flood. There's this kind of statement of a change coming, and part of what it's indicating is a need for instruction that is kind of glaringly absent in this kind of first period of interaction between God and humanity. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah,
What was
Andrew.
I about to say? It is interesting that there's no instructions on proper sacrifice at this time, because I know that later on comes Melchizedek with the bread and the wine
Mm-hmm.
as his sacrifice, and that eventually is a foreshadowing in the Old Testament of the high priesthood of Christ,
Right.
the Eucharist.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So just think for it, like, let me try this out. What if it's not actually that appropriate to do this thing? Just like, what if sacrifice, it's more built into kind of the human psyche, and God is accommodating it to begin with? Okay? I mean, just try it. Because here you don't have any mention, like God doesn't ask for it. So what is it on the human side? What are the presuppositions before I bring an offering? It would be something like, I don't know, maybe if I give, I'll get. I think that's kind of what I highlighted here. If I give, I'll get. And I think there was something like that in Cain, and that's why it's the guy whose name is Control that thinks up this thing, right? But kind of built into that is this thought that God probably is pretty much like me, like he likes the stuff I like, right? And so maybe I'll give him some of that in order to get back. So, there's kind of assumptions there that, are at least questionable. And it's just interesting to notice that it starts from human beings. It doesn't start with God calling for it. Same sort of thing like after the flood is you'll get these sacrifices. And God responds. It says, he smells the pleasing aroma and so forth. But he doesn't ask for it. And the first thing that he does is kind of say, okay, let's deal with how, let's kind of regulate slaughter and what you can kill and what you can't kill and how blood's dealt with and so forth. So it's kind of like acknowledging there's something in humanity that has this impulse. And so part of what I want to ask is, what's the impulse that gives rise to the thought of offering of sacrifice, right? And because like having it rooted in Cain and distinguished from this line of Seth that thinks of prayer, right, of calling on the name of the Lord, which is a more relational thing. When you call on the name, usually you're looking in the face, as it were, right? So that's different from this kind of exchange thing, right? And so seeing those as kind of coming from different lines seems to be part of the picture here. So I may be doing too much with that, but it's interesting that at least that much is there. It's a human idea, right? Like we think it up, we do it, and it's distinguished then from this kind of more favored line that is the first to kind of discover prayer as a way of interacting. So anyhow, there's all sorts of things, like just because something kind of originates with us doesn't mean there's not something really good and important that comes of it later as God incorporates it. But it's something worth thinking about. So
maybe this
yeah.
this inherent desire to give without being instructed to do so. I think if we examine early civilizations, they have this common thing that they shared in common. I think this inherent desire to give something.
Right.
Maybe it arose, I'm not just thinking it, maybe it arose out of a sense of superstition. If we don't give, our crops will fail. Therefore, we must give to guarantee.
Yeah, this is that instrumentalizing relation.
Spring or whatever, the
Yeah.
crops will grow. We won't die of starvation. Same thing regarding flocks of animals. If we don't sacrifice a few lambs, a few cattle or something, then the flocks will die or something. Some kind of inherent not suspicion, superstition.
Right.
The desire to give.
Yeah. Yeah, well, superstition, I mean, we can use that word, but that's what I was referring to as an instrumentalized relation. So I give in order to get. There's some kind of leverage involved. So, yeah, that's good.
Do you think the text gives away if Cain's sin started already before his sacrifice or after, how he responded to it? Because you refer to that maybe he had like wrong intentions or something, but you also see in the Bible acts of faith and prayer where God doesn't answer. So and I also see it in like just my personal life where he doesn't answer, where I in hindsight do not think, okay, no, I was in sin there, so that's why he didn't answer. So do you think the text gives it somehow clues to that, or how do you do that?
So all I can work with, so the only clue here is in the symbolic names, right? And then and on from there, right? And kind of that name being attached to I've acquired a man, you know, just like the Lord did or something like that. And so that's where I'm kind of working off of this with this kind of disposition to control, right? But part of what I'm doing that, one of the reasons I'm doing that is that this is, again, it's a narrative of origins in which kind of what you get are added layers of what's kind of shared to humanity. And I do find that as a basic disposition that we have is that we can turn just about anything into something I use as a means for something else, right? And just maybe I should say this. I said at the beginning that one way of thinking about this is that if you're being a brother, you don't say, what's a brother good for, right? Another way to say that is that there's something in this kind of person-to-person relation that brotherhood is supposed to be, in this person-to-person relation that's fundamentally violated when I think of the person just in terms of what I can get or use or make happen out of, right? That persons call for being ends, not means, so to speak, right? And one of the basic things that happens that begins to warp relationships in the world is when I take something that ought to be kind of an end in itself, like a family relation, right? And I start to use that for the sake of getting something else. I turn the end into a means, right? And just think about it this way. If you ever had that happen to you where you're turned into the means to something else, you realize you're just a tool, right? There's a deep sense of violation, isn't there, in that, right? And so it's a really, really basic thing, and I think that's why it's here in the same kind of breath, in the same episode with murder, right? Because murder it's like the ultimate kind of instrumentalization of a person. It's like, well, you're either useful or useless, right? Whereas an appropriate relation to a person is neither of those, right? There's a dignity in the person as a person, okay? And should be kind of honored for what they are, right? So, yeah. Any other? Maybe I'll point out one other thing here. This isn't the only time that but you have in a number of origin accounts, not necessarily like origin of the world, but origin stories, fratricide, the killing of a brother, and the founding of a city, right? So kind of most famously with, Romulus and Remus, the founding of Rome. But you also have it then with the founding, like as the kind of the threat, the possibility that hangs over the story of the founding of the people of Israel, right? So you get, it takes a long time to get Isaac that comes along, and then you have Isaac and Rebecca have Jacob and Esau, and they just almost, Esau almost kills them, right? It's touch and go a couple times. And it just like barely missed that, and then you get the 12 sons from Jacob, and they just almost kill one of them, Joseph, right? And so this, like, can you have the founding of something without the killing of a brother? And there's something deep in that, because in order to have kind of this larger, more complex social ordering, like a city, there's something that has to happen, which is hierarchy, right? Somebody has to be over somebody else. And there's something in the brother to brother relation that kind of, that it violates that, right? Like to have one brother kind of not just be better at something, but like rule over another one. It seems to destroy something really basic, right, in that relation. And so there's something in this and kind of a question that's raised of like, what goes into the founding of a kind of more complex social order? Does it, is there a way to do that without brother killing brother? Now, the answer is yes, because you find that in the kind of the narrative of the patriarchs and so forth. But it's a near miss, right? It's a near miss. It's like, it's not an easy thing to pull off, right? And the first account, it happens, right? In the first account, the first city, it happens after a brother kills a brother, right? So anyhow, it's an interesting kind of thing, yeah.
I'm just wondering what might really have been on the minds
Uh-huh.
of the scholars who actually sat down, presumably at some stage,
Uh-huh.
and worked this story out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Cain and Abel, I mean, presumably they're mythical figures. There was
Uh-huh.
never a Cain, there was never
Uh-huh.
an Abel.
Uh-huh.
It's pure myth. But behind the myth lies an extremely important reality.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just wondering what could have been on the minds of the scholars. What were they really trying to convey to the readers of the time?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it goes back to the idea of competition and rivalry and jealousy.
Mm-hmm.
Another question is, do we know from our studies and knowledge of the ancient world
Mm-hmm.
whether a cow or a pig or a lamb
Uh-huh.
had greater significance and symbolism, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
than a crop of the earth?
Mm-hmm.
And could that be a reason why the Lord accepted Abel's
Right. Does he just like meat
sacrifice
better?
rather than
Yeah.
Cain's? I'm just wondering,
Yeah.
how did the ancient world view
Uh-huh.
the two in comparison? The animals and crops. And do we know that?
Well, what you do get here in this account is that God takes a special ownership, I would say, of blood, right? Because the soul's in the blood, all of that. So he has like, if this is going to be shed, it needs to be done in a particular way. It goes to nobody else. Nobody eats it. All of that. So that's definitely in there. What was I going to say? The first part with. Yes. So say a word about primordial. You have these symbolic names and so forth, but part of what's going on here is something like this. Primordial events is not just something that happened long, long ago. It's depicted as something that's always happening all the time. Right? It's something like that. And so, which is one of the reasons why you have these kind of symbolic names and so forth. And so all of this, it's like, yes, I think there's a sense there's a first, there's a development, there's genealogy and so forth. And you're going to have to, part of what we'll do when we get into chapter 5 and the beginning of chapter 6, you kind of have to take the narrative world of like, the lifetimes and all of that. You have to kind of enter into the narrative world to get to what the point is. but yeah, but my general sense of how to read these is that whatever happened back then, we're told about it in such a way that it highlights something that's, as it were, still happening, something like that. Yeah. All right. That it? So thank you so much. I appreciate you guys. So, yeah. And so